What's up, metal and heavy music fans? Today we are ranking classic black metal debut albums. Alright, let's kick it off with a very strong one in Sacramentum's Far Away from the Sun. And I feel like I don't hear as many people talk about this album, like it doesn't come up as often in common conversation as some of the other albums we're going to talk about. But man, is this an S tier album. It is just fantastic. The melodies, the atmosphere, the production is on a different level. Like for a debut around this time in the 90s, where everything else was kind of like raw and just really wretched and decrepit, which, you know, there's a place for that too. This just blew me away when I first heard it, and it really kind of broadened the scope of what I thought about the genre in general, especially its infancy. Now, on the flip side of that, we have Gorgoroth with Pentagram. Speaking of like as raw and just violent and aggressive as you can get, I also love this album. Like there's different parts of black metal that I really enjoy. I'm going to put this one at A tier. I don't think it's as strong as they get a little bit later on. Like we're talking, 2-3 albums out from this. Under the Sign of Hell is like an absolute classic. This doesn't quite reach that level, but it's still just, if you want to bang your head and just listen to some just evil sounding shit, then Gorgoroth's Pentagram is a great choice. All right, then we have Cradle of Filth with the Principle of Evil Made Flesh. Now, I know a lot of elitists will just cast off Cradle of Filth completely, and some of them will call this their favorite album and say it's like their only good album because of how like raw and different it is. Me personally, though, I really dislike this album. It is my least favorite Cradle of Filth album. I'm going to put it on D tier because I think it's among the worst on this particular list. I just don't like the sound of it, the production, the vocals. Everything's just a little bit off. And even the band said that they were super disappointed with it when they first heard the final product. So do with that what you will. Back to a very strong one, we have Satyricon with Dark Medieval Times. For my money, I think this is one of their best albums, if not their best album. I know they went on to become a little bit more evil, a little bit more ferocious, but I just love the, again, atmosphere of this album. It just sort of washes over you and takes you to a different time and place, and I love it. I love it. I think it stands up with some of the best, which is why it also belongs at S tier. All right, Dark Funeral, The Secrets of the Black Arts. This one I have not listened to as much as some of these other albums, just because I didn't really get into Dark Funeral until later on, but I enjoy this one. I think it's another strong outing. The production is up there. It's much more a little bit lush, but kind of balanced with the more aggressive elements too, and it's got a lot going for it. I would put this one at A tier as well, but I'm looking forward to spending more time listening to that one. Now, Dissection, the Somberlain, I know some people absolutely adore this album. I don't love it like those people do. I think it's a fine album. I'm much more of a Storm of the Light's Bane fan. Like that, to me, that's the S tier album for them. But this one, I'd say it's good, but not on the same level. I'm going to put it at B tier. But Emperor, Within the Nightside, Eclipse. What a stunning album. Like, this should almost go without saying. There's a reason why this is my back patch on my vest. S tier all the way, just absolutely unmatched, especially for the time. Like, this album is so far ahead of its time and really kind of like created the symphonic black metal sound. Like, everybody from here on out who wanted to do that were on some level copying what Emperor were doing in some way or another, and it just stands tall still. Like, even against all these newer albums, it can still go head to head with any of them because it's just so amazing. Like, words fail me, honestly, to describe how gorgeous this album is in terms of, I know I keep saying atmosphere, but obviously on that note, with the symphonic elements coming together with the more straightforward black metal elements, but it's not a clash. Like, it all kind of like fuses together into this almost like stage performance kind of experience. And I could gush about this one all day, but yeah, absolutely has to be S tier, near the top, if not the tip top. All right, Borknagar with their self-titled. Another one where I am more fond of the Olden Domain overall, but this one also like does a great job of mashing this very noisy, dissonant, abrasive black metal with also these like more folky elements, which I thought was really cool when I was first kind of diving into the black metal classics. Like, especially when those chants first come in with the like, oh, like that part really confused me in the best way when I first heard this and was like, oh, wow, that's different. They're doing something cool. And that's an element that I like to include on some of these higher ranked albums, is that they're bringing something a little bit different to the game, and that early on too, which is pretty cool. So not quite S tier. Again, if it was the olden domain, I'd probably put it up there. I'm going to put this one at A tier. All right, this is going to have some mixed reactions in the comments, I can already tell. So Mayhem de Mysterium dom Sathanas. I think this album is grossly overrated. I get how important it is. Like, it is a critical record to the black metal movement. There's so much history behind it. There's so much, like, mythology even behind it. So I don't think it's, like, an unimportant record or a bad record. I own it on my shelf. It's good. And I want to also say that anything that I rank, especially in the lower tiers, doesn't mean I would, like, grade that album with that letter. It's just the, you know, differentiating between which of these I think is better and I enjoy more personally. It's all my opinion. So down in the comments, let me know what you think of this one, but I just find this to be super overrated and not that enjoyable to listen to. Like, I don't think it's musically that good of an album. So I'm going to put it at C tier and take the pitchforks and the torches. It's my video, my opinion, so I'm not going to apologize. Stay mad if you're mad, but let me know what you think. All right, Darkthrone, I kind of cheated here because I know their debut is technically Soulside Journey, but that's really more of a death metal album, and this is their first kind of black metal album. Fenriz would actually argue that this is still more of a death metal album. He even says so in the commentary on the disc, which I highly recommend listening to Fenriz's commentaries on their albums. They're gold. Yeah, he'd argue that the next album is their first true black metal album, but come on. Blaze in the Northern Sky, absolute classic. I'm not going to quite put it at S tier, even though it's an S tier Darkthrone album, but it's lacking some of the sheer impressiveness of those top tier albums. I'm still going to put it at A, though. I love listening to this album. Of the more like raw, just sort of like bleak, dissonant black metal out there, it's one of the albums that I actually, in that style, really enjoy. Like, unironically, I'm not just going to put it on just because, like, I kind of need to keep up with it. There's something about it that is special. Let's go with Immortal, with Diabolical, Fullmoon, Mysticism. Great debut. Like, I remember when I was listening to this discography, I was kind of surprised at how good some of the early stuff is. Now, is it pure Holocaust? No. Is it going, later on with Sons of the Northern Darkness? Is it at the heart of winter? Absolutely not, but it's pretty strong. Like, it's another really enjoyable album. It already kind of showcases their particular style from the very beginning. There's some rough edges to kind of iron out, but it's strong and it's far from their worst, I'll tell you that much. So I'm going to put this one at B tier. All right, another potentially controversial here, Rotting Christ with Thy Mighty Contract. Another band I absolutely love. They have so many albums in their discography that I think are fantastic. If we're talking about the early days and going potentially S tier, A Dead Poem is where it's at for me. This album, instrumentally, I enjoy it, but the vocals, something about the vocals just kind of put me off. It's not like something I enjoy listening to as a result. So not bad, but just kind of okay. I'm going to also put this one at C tier. Carpathian Forest with Black Shining Leather, another album that I haven't listened to quite as many times as some of these other ones, but have some prior experience with, and it's fun. It's a fun album, just like straight for the throat, more of that sort of aggressive sound, and yeah, it's a good time. It's lacking, again, some of the prestige of some of these higher albums, but it's a good one, so I think it fits on B tier. All right, let's go with Ulver and Bergtatt. I really agonized with which tier to put this one on, but ultimately I decided it's going to go S tier. It's kind of wavering between A and S, but something about just like the atmosphere of it is just so incredible. Like, it really just, again, surrounds you and wraps you up and takes you to a different place. Like, I love those albums where you kind of like lose track of what you're doing and where you are. You just get lost in the perfect album cover too. Like, you really do feel like you're lost in this hillside woods with this like overcast sky, and you're just like taking stake with nature. You're getting back to your roots, so to speak, and that folkiness of it for a beginning album especially is very impressive stuff. All right, Dimmu Borgir for All Tid. And it's an album that I kind of like forget about a lot in the Dimmu Borgir discography, because I kind of more think of Stormblast for whatever reason as like the debut, and I enjoy that one more, and then moving on from that they just kind of get better and better and then start to get inconsistent later on. This album is another one where I just think it's okay. It's got some atmosphere to it, it's got some cool elements, and I feel like, you know, because of what they become with the more mainstream side of their sound, they sort of are another one like Cradle that sort of gets cast out into the fires for not being true enough. But they were there, like right there in the early 90s, just like everybody else, and kind of doing their thing. And I think it's cool that they carved out a special niche for themselves. Ultimately, this album to me, though, is definitely among the lesser in their discography. I'm going to put it at C tier. All right, we have Marduk with Dark Endless, and yes, another band where they have better albums that I enjoy much more. I mean, of course, we've got those of the Unlight, and particularly Opus Nocturne is my personal favorite of theirs. But this album has its pros, too. Like, it's got some really strong elements to it. It was better than I thought it would be, too. Kind of like going back to other discographies where I'd listened more to their later career and then had to sort of like refresh my memory on what the earliest stuff sounded like. I'm going to put this one at B tier. Pretty solid, but not among the best. All right, another one, maybe controversial, Burzum. You know, Burzum's okay. I'm not as into the more like droning side of black metal, and you could argue that Burzum kind of like helped spawn that more like atmospheric, even that like it's so funny because the black gaze crowd as far as it stands today is much more of like hipsters and kind of people who would not have the same mindset that Varg does, like complete opposites. But I feel like they are very much influenced, whether they'd like to admit it or not, by early Burzum. Like that's very much where a lot of that sound, the black metal side of the sound, comes from. And so, you know, tribute to be paid. Personally, I'm much more of a fan of Philosopheme out of the Burzum discography. And another one, this one's just sort of okay. Not bad, not great. I'm going to put it also at C tier. So we've got like two absolute heavyweights of black metal, Burzum and Mayhem, with their albums in C tier. I'm really interested to see what the comments say about that. But at the end of the day, I really don't care either. I think it's hilarious if people actually get mad. All right, we got Samael with Worship Him. And this is a pretty solid, very early album. Another one I'd say that I didn't listen to a ton, but I enjoyed it for what it is. I don't think it's among the best. I think it's really solid, though. And so I think B tier feels about right for that. I really need to dig into the Samael discography a bit more. I've kind of like dabbled with it over the years, but I've never like taken the full dive. So that could be an interesting one. All right, then we have the debut album from Windir. I'm not even going to try to pronounce this name. I tried practicing it, and it just does not want to come out of my mouth. So Windir is one of my favorite black metal bands, despite having a really smaller discography. This debut is another one that's it's solid. I think it's more solid than a lot of these other ones, but comparatively, when we're talking about Lickford and 1184 in particular, like this sound got expanded on so much and just matured and really became something special. That said, this album, I really just, their entire discography, there's something special about the melodies in the guitars. Like there's just something so trademark. Like you hear a Windir riff and you immediately recognize it. You know what it is. There's just from the very beginning something special. Again, it gets better later on, but I wanted to pay tribute to that fact in terms of it being something special that does stand out. So I'm going to put this one at A tier. Ooh, another controversial one. I love Bathory. All of their different eras, like the more kind of like progressive and folky stuff, the more sort of black metal stuff, the thrashier stuff. This is really more of like a thrash metal album. And so again, comparatively, right? I wouldn't give this album a low grade if I was just reviewing it and scoring it on its own. But comparing it to these other albums, that's all we're looking at here, because I don't want everything on one level. That would be a really boring video. I want to differentiate here. So for me, this one's C tier. Again, if we were talking about Under the Sign of the Black Mark, or especially Bloodfire Death, my personal favorite, then it would be much, much higher than that. But again, compared to these other albums, it's a little bit low. But then hopefully, redemptively, we have Enslaved with Vikingligr Veldi, which I probably am still not pronouncing even close to correctly. I absolutely adore this album. It is one of my favorite black metal debuts. I love how like cavernous and it's just interesting. It's a very unique album. It's not my favorite Enslaved album, and it's hard for me to even decide which ones are. I have a tier list for their entire discography that you can check out for my extended thoughts on their full discography, because it's one of my favorites. Like, pound for pound, like, Enslaved have probably one of the strongest discographies in metal, period. Not just black metal. But yeah, as far as this album goes, it's got these interesting little, like, hooks and melodies kind of hidden within it, but then also just this very, again, atmospheric sound to it. The production is really like cavernous and frosty. It nails that coldness. I loved listening to this album while playing like Skyrim. Just an all-around fantastic record, and I think it belongs at the top in S tier, right alongside in the Nightside Eclipse. Like, it's kind of always between those two for me, which one's the absolute best. I think Nightside Eclipse edges it out just a bit, but they're both really strong. But now it's your turn. Let me know what your favorite black metal debuts are down in the comments. Where do we agree? Where do we disagree? Check out this playlist for my thoughts on a lot more black metal. And if you want to support the channel, I have merch now. Awesome Skeletor-themed t-shirts. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.